Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. It's me, Aunt Vicky. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to tell you some backstory on myself, so stay tuned. In today's video, excuse everything I've got piled around. My son is fixing to move out in a couple of days, and we've been going through stuff and gathering stuff for him, so I'm a little sad. But today's video is going to be about how did I deal with stress, or did I? So I'm just going to jump right into this. So as some of you know, I'm the mother of two kids. Caitlyn, she's 28, and Dalton, he's fixing to turn 26 in July. Caitlyn was my firstborn, as you know, and Dalton is my baby. Caitlyn, as some of you know, was born with cystic fibrosis, and she's had it, pretty rough in her life. She has had numerous hospitalizations, and during that time, I would have to leave Dalton with either my parents or Chris's parents. And as you can imagine, that was really, really tough. Chris and I got married in 1993. Caitlyn came along in 1997, and Dalton came along in 1999. As you can imagine, I was very, very, very excited to be. I've always wanted to be a mom, always. I felt like that was what I was supposed to do in this world, was be a mom. Before Caitlyn was born, I just had an inkling that something was different. I don't want to say wrong, because there's nothing wrong with Caitlyn. She's just different. I was born in 1968, and I was born in February, and I had a cousin that was born in March. So we were like, I think she was born March or May 1. So we were just a month or 2 or 3 months apart. Well, she was born with cystic fibrosis. And back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there wasn't a lot known about cystic fibrosis. And she was pretty sick. She was diagnosed when she was, I think, 19 months. Well, no, I forget how old she was when she was diagnosed. But she was pretty sick. My mom can remember how she was, and she was pretty sick. So my mom knew what to look for. She lived to be 19 months old in 1969. And the treatments back then were limited. They didn't know a whole lot. So I kind of knew what to look for. Mom knew what to look for. And I kind of had an inkling before she was born that she would have it. For some reason, I thought she would have it. And here's the thing with cystic fibrosis. With cystic fibrosis, both parents have to be a carrier of the gene. I knew it was in my family because I had a cousin that passed away with it. Chris had no idea. But Caitlyn was born. She was born, and she weighed 8 pounds 5 ounces. But when she was born, she didn't have a BM. She was born, and then it was over 48 hours, almost 48, about 36 to 40 hours. She hadn't had a BM. And I was concerned, and, I kept, has it happened? Has it happened? Has it happened? No, but she's fine. When she had one, it looked like silly putty. And then, everything was fine. I took her back for her 6 weeks. And when the day we took her home, she had gone from 8 pounds 5 ounces to 7 pounds 13 ounces. When I brought her back for her 6 weeks appointment, she didn't even weigh 7 pounds 13 ounces. I was breastfeeding her at the time. And, she just was classified as failure to thrive. And when I took her to her appointment, her pediatrician looked at me and said, "Don't you know that this baby is starving to death?" And I was like, "Well, no, I'm breastfeeding her. She eats every 2 hours. She eats all the time. I know, I don't know that. So he said, bring her back in a couple weeks. I brought her back. She may have gained a couple ounces. And I battled with that until she was 11 months old. You know, back and forth to the doctor, back and forth to the doctor. She wouldn't gain weight. She wouldn't gain weight. Well, when she was 11 months old, she had the croup. And she just couldn't get over it. Just couldn't get over it. And I finally took her to the pediatrician. And I said, look, I need you to send her for the sweat test, which is a diagnostic. They stimulate your sweat glands and it produces an excessive amount of sweat, and they collect that sweat and then they'll take it and they'll weigh it and then they'll extract to see how much sodium chloride is in it. And that's the determinant, you know, that's one of the how they determine. And they said, well, yeah, we can send her, but I don't think she's got it. This is what I dealt with the whole time. And I took her. They finally decided to take her, send her. And I took her. And before we left, they said, let me go ahead and see if we've got enough sweat to do the test. And they come back and he said, oh, yes. He said, we got plenty. And I'm like, okay, I knew it. So it was late in the afternoon by the time I got home and the pediatrician's office was closed. So the next day, the pediatrician calls me. I already knew she had it. Suspected. And she says, well, she said she's got cystic fibrosis. I about hit my knees. She said, but if worse comes to worse, she could have a lung transplant. And I was like, wow, you know, let me deal with the aspect that she's got this genetic condition that is considered fatal. And the life expectancy at the time was minimal. And I said, just let me deal with this before you bombard me with all this excess information. So they set up an appointment at Children's Hospital to see the pulmonologist, and we go, and they do the blood work, and it shows up in the blood work, and the doctor was very informative and, you know, told us what we needed to do. There was the breathing treatments. There was the enzymes that she would need because she couldn't absorb fats and she couldn't gain weight. And she produced an excessive amount of mucus. That's one of the reasons that they have to have transplants, is because of all the damage from all these recurrent exacerbations, infections that they get. So she was doing okay until she hit about 5, I think it was, 5 or 6. And they determined she just couldn't gain enough weight. So they put a gastrostomy tube, a G-tube in her. And we would do the nighttime feeds. She was 5 or 6 at the time. And then she did that for a while, and she did pretty good. And they decided, Caitlyn has a birth defect on her left hand. And she's had numerous surgeries on that hand, and that's a whole nother story. So she was restricted. She couldn't use this arm because of the blood vessels, because of the issue with her hand. It could cause major problems. So they could only use her right arm. Well, her veins become horrible, so they had to put in a portacath in. So I had to learn to change G-tubes. I had to learn to do nighttime enteral feeds. I had to learn how to access and de-access a port with a needle that was in her chest. I had to learn how to do at-home IVs. I had to learn how to do the flush. You know, ever so often she would have to have her port flushed. I had to learn how to do that. She had those for a while. When she hit 16, she got really sick. She would be in and out of the hospital quite often. And they had mentioned, you know, the possibilities that, you know, your way it's looking, you could be headed towards a lung transplant. So they sent her to a pulmonary rehab, and she rebounded, and she did well. Well, not long after that, her health, and her PFTs, I don't know if you guys know what a PFT is, but a PFT is your pulmonary function. That's how much air you get in and out, you know, how much. Well, they were basically in the 40s and 50%. So when she got to be upwards in high school, she got really sick. I mean, really, really sick. She would be in the hospital for 3 weeks. She would come home for 2 weeks. She'd be back in the hospital for 3 weeks. She'd come home for 2 weeks. Caitlyn has had over 200 procedures in the OR. That is including bronchoscopies, endoscopies, colonoscopies, port placements, G-tube placements, fundoplications, her adenoids removed. She has had hand surgeries 3 times. She has had numerous sinus procedures. She's had her lung transplant, and she'll continue. She's been through it. And when she hit 20 years old, that's when her health really took a hit. And the stress on, she and I butted heads. I mean, we butted heads on every aspect. She wanted to go out and she wanted to live her life. And I wanted to protect her so she could be around. But she told me later, she said, Mom, she said, I knew I was dying. And Caitlyn was dying. She was dying. But she said, Mom, I knew I was dying, but I wanted to live. I didn't want to just curl up somewhere and die. I said, well, I understand that. But she got out and, took some risks that we didn't think that she should. But she's a teen, she was young. She wanted to live her life. She was bitter. She was resentful. And she's like, why can't I do what other people do? So they mentioned in October that she needed to go to be evaluated for a transplant. She was 21 years old. And she came home and she told, I said, who, and it's because we live in East Tennessee. The first place they think of is Vanderbilt, because that's where they do the transplants here in Tennessee. And she came home and she broke down. And she said, Mom, Dad, no 20-year-old should have to make this decision. And I broke down. I said, I know it's not fair. And I said, but I can't make this decision for you, Caitlyn. I can tell you what I want for you, but this is what you have to decide. And whatever you decide, we're going to support you. If you don't want to have it, we'll support you. If you want to have it, we will support you. But this is something you have to decide. So she decided she would go for the evaluation. Well, Vanderbilt contacts the pulmonology at UT, and they say, she's not a candidate for transplant here. It's too dangerous. With what she cultures in her lungs and with her status, we don't have good results. We just can't do this. They wouldn't even look at her. They just looked at her medical records and decided she's too risky. So that Caitlyn felt defeated. And she goes back to UT and they said, okay, Caitlyn, where do you want to go? Where do you want to try next? She said, well, what about Duke? She said, just try Duke. So I said, okay, well, I'll get you in with Duke. Well, they referred her to Duke. And we had to wait for insurance to approve everything. So they said, okay, we'll see her and we'll do a 5-day evaluation on her. We went and they did a 5-day evaluation. It was from Monday to Friday, and they run you through the gamut. I mean, it's mental, it's physical, it's everything. It's heart, it's lungs, it's stomach, it's all of this stuff that they have to go through. But before she had had her G-tube taken out because a couple of years prior to that, and they said, well, UT says, let's go ahead and put a G-tube back in you because we know that they're going to want to, because you're going to have to build up and you're going to have to weigh so much. And, you know, you have to weigh a certain amount. You have to, you can be too sick for a transplant, basically. So she had a G-tube placed, and we got those things, and she goes through her testing, and they meet every Tuesday and determine whether or not you qualify for the transplant. Well, on Friday before we left, we met with the social worker. She had to meet with social workers. You have to meet with financial. You have to meet with all these people. And you have to meet with a thoracic surgeon. So she had a coordinator assigned to her. And this was the guy who coordinated all the testing and all this stuff. And so the social worker said, had you talked to your coordinator? And Caitlyn said, no. So she calls him and puts him on speakerphone. And he says, Caitlyn, he says, congratulations. You're approved for a transplant. We need you here, but we need you here now. And this was right before Christmas. And we were all just like stunned, you know. We were thinking, oh, maybe she'll come back in 6 months and they'll say, you know, well, maybe then. But he said, no, we need you here, and we need you here now. You're ready now. So she said, well, can I go home? But we had to do fundraisers. We had to raise $10,000 because they need to know that you have that money that you can live on and not be stressed when you relocate. So she said, can I go home? Can I do Christmas and have Christmas with my family and then come back? They said, yeah. Before we even left Durham, I get a phone call from UT Hospital. And they say, oh, by the way, Caitlyn, on her last cultured a really, really, really bad bacteria. They won't do a transplant if you have this bacteria. And I felt like the air had just been let out of us. And so they reran it, and we had to go home and wait for them to rerun the test. It was a false positive. She didn't have the bacteria. She's had that happen twice to her, the same bacteria, a false positive on that twice. So we got through Christmas and we relocated to Durham. We moved like the second week in January. Like I said, we had to raise money because they needed to know that because we're going to be there and so close and not be home that we had the money, that we don't have to stress about that situation. So my family stepped in. They raised the money. We were off to Durham. They found us a place to stay. We didn't have to pay any rent. And everything just fell into place. So she goes through her pulmonary rehab. You have to do that. And then when you get done with it's like so many sessions. When you get done with that, they will list you. She was listed for 2 weeks. She got her transplant. She had drainage tubes on her. And those drainage tubes came out around her ribs. And one day I decided that I needed to go down to the cafeteria and get me some lunch because she was in the hospital for only 2 weeks. And I was walking up the hall. And I know, Caitlyn, you know, as a mom, you know your kids. I could track her before by her cough because I knew I could keep up with her because of her cough. Well, I was walking up the hall and I had some food in my hand. And I heard this ungodly scream. A scream that to this day I can still hear. That scream sticks with me. And I knew it was Caitlyn. She said she had never experienced so much pain in her life. Her drainage tube was against her ribs, and it was causing such bad pain. And Caitlyn was cut from armpit to armpit across. She had 84 or 86 stitches. Staples. So she was in such bad pain. I had to help her up and down out of the bed. But she came through that and she was fine. But like I said, during all this time, I had to leave Dalton. Except for her transplant, he stayed with us. Chris had to stay here and work, so Dalton and I relocated. But I had to leave Dalton ever since he was a baby. I had to make choices. I couldn't work because Caitlyn was in and out of the hospital so much. I couldn't work. And I would have to leave Dalton for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And sometimes they could bring him to the hospital and I would see him. So I felt split. I felt like, where am I supposed to be? I knew he was being taken well care of. I knew he was loved. But I was still his mom. But I also knew that there was decisions that had to be made for Caitlyn. And I had to make them because Chris had to work. There was decisions. Surgeries, there was decisions. But until she hit 18, I had to make those decisions. I had to beg and plead the insurance. I had to be her advocate on every front. So as you can imagine, I was stressed because I was going through it alone. Because my family was taking care of Dalton, Chris had to work. Caitlyn was too small. This is just what I'm talking about for me. This is not Caitlyn's fault. This is not Dalton's fault. This is no one's fault. Things happen. But I was torn. And I was stressed. And my way of dealing with things was this. And this is not for everybody. I'm just telling you this is how I dealt with it. And to this day, I figured out I didn't deal with it right. When something would come up, I've seen Caitlyn where I didn't think she'd make it through the next day. I'd seen her where I'd sit by her bed and pray all night long. But when something emergent came up, I stepped into take care of it mode. Take care of it mode. I was like, okay, this is what you have got to do. Do it. So I just did it, stepped in, and I did it. I didn't let anybody help me because I felt it was my job. I didn't rely on anyone other than take care of Dalton. I dealt with it on my own. I pushed it down. I pushed the fear down. I pushed the anger down. I pushed all of it down because I knew I had to do it. And then, when the storm had passed and things had calmed down, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I would break down. I would break down. And looking back, I know I handled it wrong. But I did what I had to do because, I was younger. And I knew it was life and death. And I knew that it had to be done. And I was the one that made the decisions. I've sat outside an OR door more times than I could ever count. I could count, but... And then my dad was diagnosed with cancer. It brought it all back. The fear. I know I don't have PTSD. I don't think I have PTSD. But it's like you have flashbacks. You just have flashbacks. When Caitlyn gets sick, it's flashback, it's flashback. You're right back there. All the emotions are right there. And with my dad, and my mom's had cancer too, and it was the same way with her. There's been so many ups and downs in my life that, it's just taken a toll. And recently someone told me, they said, "Oh, I like your stories, but you just need to basically cheer up." And I agree, I do. But I'm dealing with my dad's issues right now. And if I'm a little bit in the doldrums, at times I'm sorry. I really am. But like I said, it brings so much back. It really, really, and this is going back to when Caitlyn was diagnosed. When they told me she had CF, even though I knew it, I just grabbed a hold of Caitlyn. This is before Dalton was born. She was toddling around the house, and I just grabbed a hold of her and held her up to me, and I cried. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And she was confused because she was a baby. And I finally told my family. They all showed up and supported me. But I'm going to tell you one thing that's happened to me that's got me through this. I don't know if you guys are religious or not. I was raised in a religious home. My dad's a preacher, But I was feeling so overwhelmed that I decided I'm just going to go get in the bathtub and just take me a bath and try to... So I got in there, and he just came to me and said, "Just talk to God. Just talk to God." So I said, "God," and it was like this voice just spoke to me. And before I could even say another word, I heard this voice. It was the calmest, sweetest, most precious voice I've ever heard in my life. And it said, "I know your need. I've got this. I'm in control. I'm here. Lay it on me." I didn't even have to say anything but his name. And there was a peace come across me. And for years and years and years, I didn't worry about losing Caitlyn because I knew God was in control. When she got so sick that she needed a transplant and her lung function fell below 20%, my faith kind of went out the window a little bit. And I knew in my mind that if we didn't get her a transplant, I wouldn't have her by the end of the year. She was that sick. But God saw fit to step in and intervene, along with some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful medical people. He knew where Caitlyn needed to be, and he placed her with the best, and she had the best. She had the best surgeon, the best hospital, the best staff. God was in the house, and he took care. So, I just wanted to let you know that that is what got me through this situation. And that's what's going to continue to get me through. I'm so blessed. I'm so honored to have you all in my life to encourage me. And like I said, if I get down in the doldrums, I'm sorry. But sometimes life steps in. I love you guys. I hope this explains some things. And I hope you tune in to the next one. And I'll talk to you guys later. I love you. Bye.